Hi everyone, thanks for having me along today to talk to you about AOC's recent work that we've been undertaking on a medieval pottery production site in Roslin. Unfortunately, my former colleague Dan Bateman's not able to make it along today, so I'm going to be presenting this work on his behalf, and also Derek Hall, who we've been working on alongside this project. You'll all be familiar with Roslin already. And so just to orientate ourselves to our current site, the image on the right shows the northern extent of the village in the bottom right-hand corner of the map. And you can see that this is bounded to the north by the former railway line. The area of lands to the north of that is covered in little lines. Those are our evaluation trenches in advance of development in this area. But the area that I'm going to be focusing on today is this sort of pink and blue rectangle. And this is where we found the very truncated and robbed out remains of two possible kiln features. Whilst I'm still on this slide, I also just want to draw your attention to the location of the former Roslin colliery and brickworks, because I will be coming back to that in a moment. So what we uncovered during the excavations were two possible kiln features. The first, kiln A, that you can see in the top two images, consisted of a subcircular chamber with a flue or stoke hole extending out to one side. You can see that there's some basal slabs surviving towards the centre of the chamber, but other than this, no internal structures survive. This is broadly consistent with a musty Type 1 kiln, and the radiocarbon dates that we obtained from samples within it dates the activity to the 15th century. The second feature of interest is, you can see in the bottom two images, is very different. We have a subcircular chamber, but there's possible stoke holes or flues extending out in opposing directions from two sides, and we only have small patches of stone and clay lining surviving. This is broadly consistent with a musty Type 2 medieval kiln, but unfortunately, as you can see, we were unable to investigate the entirety of the feature as it extended beyond the trench edge. Again, we obtained radiocarbon dates from this, dating the activity here to the 14th and early 15th century. Both of these features were associated with quantities of medieval pottery, including waste or sherds. Now, as you can see by comparing the kiln features at Roslin to other kiln sites in Scotland, we're missing the typical stone lining or walling within the chambers. And it's supposed that these once did exist, but have been robbed out prior to the kilns being demolished and backfilled. So despite some inconsistencies with the features in terms of confident identification as kilns, we can be in little doubt of their association with medieval pottery production due to the quantity of pottery found within them. Both kilns were also associated with large dumps of medieval pottery, which include substantial portions of vessels that had been smashed in situ. There was a mixture of vessel types present. Some were glazed, some were unglazed, and there were large quantities of wasters, as well as some kiln furniture. And these appear to represent dumps of defective vessels that were cleared out from the adjacent kilns. The waster sherds that I mentioned display varying amounts of distortion as a result of heat damage. And you can see in the top right image, we've got heavy vitrification of the surfaces that turn them glassy and black. We can also see pronounced warping and blistering of the glaze and fabric, as you can see in the bottom centre image. These defects would have rendered the vessels unusable or not fit for sale, and as a result, they were discarded. In all, we have recovered over 4,500 sherds that represent both Scottish white gritty ware vessels that you can see on the left here, and medieval red wares that you can see on the right. The fabric type does not appear to be segregated by kiln or by dump. There was a mixture of both within all of the features we investigated. The assemblage on the whole is dominated by jugs, and although I mentioned earlier that we have other vessel types surviving within the assemblage, I'm afraid I don't have time to talk about those in detail today. Sorry. So our jugs from Roslin are all fairly similar in form, as you can see from the left-hand image. We've got a variety of globular or ovoid-bodied jugs. Some are squatter than others, some with more pronounced saggy bases, but all in all, they are suggestive of a 14th to 15th century date, which is augmented by our radiocarbon dates from the site. These forms are all very similar in comparison to products of other contemporary sites in Scotland, such as Colston in East Lothian and Stenhouse Muir in Falkirk, as you can see on this slide. Evidence of decoration was pretty sparse. This just gives you a bit of an impression of some of the decorative motifs that were present. But in general, the assemblage is dominated by plain-handled jugs. And these appear to have been really quickly made, mass-produced, and were presumably for distribution in the domestic market. There's quite a lot of interesting details amongst the assemblage in terms of production methods and manufacture. I'm afraid I don't have time to go into these in details, but just as an example, we can see variations in the way the handles were adhered to the body of the vessels. And this either represents the work of two individual potters who favoured different techniques, or a reflection of different types of jugs. We can also get insights into aspects of the firing process. So you can see from the image on the bottom right that we have drips of liquid glaze running down from the body of the jug onto the rim, and this indicates that the jugs were fired upside down in the kiln, and this is quite typical and paralleled on other sites. In some cases, we have such a volume of liquid glaze that has amassed on the lip of the rim that it must have adhered to whatever it was sitting on within the chamber of the kiln during firing. And it may have been during the process of trying to unstick the vessel that it actually broke and was subsequently discarded. We also found large quantities of flattened out pieces of organic rich fired clay. And initially we thought these were coming from the clay lining or the superstructure of the kilns, but their flattened form, their very hard fired texture, and the fact that some of them have splashes of glaze on the surfaces suggests that these were perhaps used as parting sherds to separate the stacks of the vessels in the kiln during firing. And we have a few examples of kiln props that must have been used to either raise the vessels off the base of the chamber or to create layers within the stacks of the vessels in the kiln during the firing process. The real key piece of evidence in our programme of post-excavation analysis was ICP analysis, and that was conducted on a sample of the sherds. This type of analysis is able to classify the inorganic chemical composition of the clays used in the pottery. And the aim of this analysis was to determine whether or not we could identify a distinctive chemical fingerprint or a signature for the pottery at Roslin. And if so, we could try and then compare that to other sites in Scotland. So we selected 35 samples and included a fragment of a mid-20th century Roslin brick made at the brickworks to the west of the site that I showed you earlier. This analysis has proven that two distinct clays were exploited to produce the Scottish White Gritty ware and the red wares on the site. This is not surprising, but they are still similar chemically, suggesting that they probably weren't far removed from one another, and they were probably still pretty local to the site. The Roslin brick was a triumph. It was found to have the same chemical signature as the Scottish White Gritty ware, indicating that they came from the same source. So we can be certain that the clays used in the Roslin kilns were collected locally. We don't have any quarry pits surviving, so it may well be that those were subsumed either underneath the modern village or more likely the more modern brickworks to the west. Possible imports that we identified during the study of the pottery were actually found to have been made on site from the same clays as the rest of the assemblage, and this suggests that we have pots being made to mimic English styles of pottery rather than actual imports. And we've also identified a correlation between a small number of sherds to examples from assemblages analysed in Portobello and at Morrison's Haven in East Lothian. So just to very quickly summarise, we can demonstrate that Scottish white gritty wares and red wares were being made on the site during the 14th and 15th centuries AD. We have a very plain assemblage which seems to be targeted for a domestic market. And although we don't quite understand the relationships between what we've found between Portobello and Morrison's Haven, this certainly suggests that the products from Roslin were being distributed within the Lothians. More broadly, the kilns at Roslin are a very valuable addition to the current limited gazetteer of medieval pottery production sites in Scotland.
Thank
Thank you.
you.